Maud West, private inquirer, licensed, discreet, and currently registered at the Morningside Club, Mayfair, under a name that is not her own. This is her account of the matter. Some details have been condensed, none of the important ones. The Distaff Side.
I have worked in train compartments, borrowed flats, and on one occasion, a lighthouse. I have been a widow, a governess, a visiting cousin, and a woman who speaks no English whatsoever. I have never, until this week, been a lady of leisure in a Mayfair gentlewomen's club, while a police inspector stood on the pavement outside and got increasingly cold. I will admit there are worse assignments. The Morningside Club occupies a Georgian townhouse on a quiet street in Mayfair. There is a small brass plate beside the door. There is no canopy. There are no window boxes. The building has spent 40 years perfecting the art of being overlooked, and it has largely succeeded. Inspector Flynn has not succeeded in overlooking it. He is standing on the pavement, reading the brass plate, with the expression of a man who has already been turned away once. His hat is on straight. His coat is buttoned to the collar. He looks like someone has recently told him something he doesn't like, and he is in the process of deciding what to do about it. He has been standing there for 12 minutes. I know because I am watching him from the window of a cab that has recently pulled up across the street. I know who he is. We have a history, Flynn and I, professional, at arm's length, occasionally useful to each other in the careful way that a detective and a police inspector can be useful, without either of them acknowledging it directly. I have not told him I'm coming. He has not told me he's here. This puts us on an even footing, which is precisely where I prefer to be. I pay the driver, straighten Lady Harriet Vane's hat, and walk to the front door of the Morningside Club without looking at him. He looks at me. I feel it, the way you feel a room change when someone turns. The door opens before I knock. Miss Aldous, the secretary of the Morningside Club, is a woman of 62 who has cultivated stillness the way other people cultivate roses, deliberately, over many years, with considerable attention to which shoots to remove. She is already at her desk when I'm shown in. She rises, shakes my hand, and tells me what has happened in 4 sentences, none of which contain a single unnecessary word. A member, Mrs. Dorothea Fawcett, 20 years in the club, known to everyone, liked by most, was found this morning in the reading room. The armchair by the east window, which was her armchair in the way that certain chairs belong to certain people. A glass of sherry at her elbow. Cold. She had been dead for several hours. She looks at me across her desk. I look at her. We understand each other immediately, which is the best start to any professional relationship. She tells me, without quite saying it, that Inspector Flynn has been to the door. She tells me, without quite saying it, that he will not be coming through it. She asks me, without quite asking it, whether I can manage alone. I tell her I find I work best that way. The reading room is exactly what you'd want a reading room to be. High ceilings, tall windows, shelves to the cornice, armchairs positioned at the precise distance from each other that allows for comfortable solitude. There is a fire. There are 2 women at the far end who have been told nothing and are reading, or performing reading, with some concentration. The armchair by the east window has been roped off, with what appears to be a length of curtain cord, which is the most discreet cordon I have ever seen at a murder scene. Mrs. Fawcett is still in it. She is a handsome woman. Was. 67, well-dressed, hair still dark at the temples. The glass of sherry is at her right elbow, half-finished. She looks, from any distance, like a woman who fell asleep over her book. The book is still open in her lap, Volume 2 of a biography of Disraeli, which strikes me as optimistic. She will not finish it now. I spend 40 seconds in that room. I look at the sherry glass, the position of the hands, the armchair's position relative to the door. I look at the book. I look at the curtain cord. I look at the woman behind the catalogue desk of the adjoining library, who is looking at me. She looks away first. I note it. The hat check girl is 19 and has the particular quality of someone who notices everything and has made a considered decision to be useful about it. Her name is Dottie. She manages the coats, the hats, the umbrellas, and, as of this afternoon, a small but significant flow of intelligence between the inside of the club and the pavement outside. I explain what I need. She listens with the focused attention of someone who has spent 2 years watching wealthy women miscalculate how much they're being observed. She asks one question. Is the man outside the police? I say he is, and that his interests and mine are presently aligned, and that she should use her judgment about anything that doesn't fit either of those categories. She nods. She goes back to the coats. I write the first note. The reply comes back in 11 minutes, which means he was already at the gate.
Fawcett, widow, barrister's wife. No record. No known enemies according to preliminary. Who is H.V.?
Lady Harriet Vane, widow, Edinburgh, recently bereaved. Quite agreeable. H.V.
You are not recently bereaved.
Lady Harriet Vane is. Do try to keep up. H.V. There is a pause of about 20 minutes before the next note arrives.
What do you need?
I need everything he can find about the club's membership without coming within 50 feet of the building. I need to know who among the members has any financial or legal entanglement with Dorothea Fawcett. And I need, though I do not put this in the note, to know that there is someone on the other side of the wall who can move quickly if I find something I cannot manage alone. Member list. Set against any financial or legal connection to the victim. Also, have you eaten? You look as though you haven't eaten. H.V.
I am fine. Focus. She sent me half a note. Half a note, cut off mid-sentence, about reservation slips and a history of something she didn't get to finish explaining. I wrote back. Nothing came for 2 hours. I had been on the pavement since 10 that morning. I had spoken to a coal delivery man, a laundress, and a wine merchant who didn't want to be spoken to. I had established that someone, a member, not staff, had fetched the sherry from the cellar at 3:45. I had no name and no description and no way into the building to get either. I am not accustomed to having no way in. I found I disliked it considerably more than I had anticipated.
The club's lending library is a well-ordered room. 400 volumes, catalogued with precision, shelved by subject and then by author, with a small card system at the desk. The woman behind it has managed it for 11 years. Her name is Grace Whitmore. She is 34 and has the kind of face that is easy to trust, open, attentive, quick to smile. She offers me trollop. I accept. We talk about Barchester for 6 minutes, which is 4 minutes longer than I strictly need. But she has something I want, and the way to it is through the Barchester novels. The reservation slips are sorted into 2 folders. I can see this from where I'm sitting. One folder is the general tray, thick, well-thumbed. The other is behind it, barely visible behind the spine of a reference dictionary. It has been placed there deliberately. Grace's hands move near it twice while we talk, and move away without touching it. That is enough. I sit at lunch across from Violet Carew, who was Dorothea Fawcett's closest friend in the club, and who discovered the body. She is composed with considerable effort, bread roll torn into exactly equal pieces, tea measured to the same level after each sip. She tells me Dorothea was particular about her sherry, always at 4, always the same chair. She tells me Dorothea knew everyone's business. She says it the way people say things that are true and are also a verdict. I ask whether she knows a woman called Alice Marsh. Violet puts down her bread roll. She says the name is familiar. She says this to her plate. Lady Euphemia Farrell sits down across from me, uninvited, after lunch, and examines me for an uncomfortable minute. I let her. She asks about Edinburgh, about my husband, about what he collected. I tell her. Whatever was in front of him, mostly. She appears to find this satisfactory. She is not looking for a plausible answer. She is looking for a particular quality of mind. I have apparently passed. She tells me she will speak to me again. Then she leaves. I ask Dottie to pass a note asking Flynn to meet me at the side gate at 6. I add, because it is true, and because it will annoy him slightly, that I have missed luncheon and he ought to bring something from the bakery.
I am not your delivery service.
He is there at 6 with a paper bag from the bakery 2 streets over.
We'll pause there for just a moment. If you're listening to Micropulse, we'd love to know where you are and what time it is wherever you're tuning in from. Drop it in the comments, your location, your hour, your corner of the world. Every note you leave helps this community grow, and we read every one. Now, back to the club.
The gate is iron, painted black, with bars wide enough to pass a paper bag through if you angle it correctly. Flynn angles it correctly on the first attempt, which is characteristic. He looks at me through the bars with an expression I have learned to read as professional concern, plus something he would describe, if pressed, as professional concern.
You've been in there 36 hours. What have you got?
I tell him about the reservation slips. I tell him about the folder behind the dictionary. I tell him about Grace Whitmore's hands and Violet Carew's paws and the name Alice Marsh. I tell him about the hatpin, the physician's assessment of the wound, the probable instrument, the fact that it is not at the scene, which means she took it. He is quiet through all of this. He has a notepad, but he does not write anything down. He listens the way very good detectives listen, without interruption, without nodding, with his whole attention.
It'll be in the building somewhere. She couldn't have left with it, not without passing the door staff.
I know. I need to find it before she remembers it needs to go. A silence. The street is empty. Somewhere along the road a cab passes.
Are you all right in there?
I look at him. He looks at me. We are both aware, I think, that this is not a professional question. Or not entirely. I'm perfectly comfortable. It's a very good club.
That isn't what I meant.
I eat the pastry. It is very good. He has chosen well. I know. Yes. I'm all right. He nods. He steps back from the gate. He puts his hands in his pockets.
I'll be here.
He means it as a statement of operational fact. I receive it as something else, which I note and set aside, and do not examine further at this time. I go back inside.
I stood at the gate longer than was necessary after she went back in. I told myself I was turning over the timeline. I was doing nothing of the sort. I sent a note in via Dottie that evening. I did not announce it. I did not inquire whether she wished to receive it. 2 words, because 2 words were accurate, and anything beyond 2 words was not something I was prepared to commit to paper. She did not reply. I did not expect a reply. That is not what it was.
The Morningside Club, Mayfair. 3 days, or very nearly. Outside, 1 inspector, a pavement, and an untallied number of hours. Inside, 1 detective, a lending library, and a hatpin no one was meant to find. Tomorrow, both of them would have answers. Tonight, there was a note under a door. It said, "Still here." That was enough.
Day 2. I was in the library at 7:30, before Grace arrived, after the morning girl had unlocked and lit the fire. 11 minutes. The folder was behind the dictionary. The reservation slips inside it were dated across 18 months. They recorded in Grace's neat hand which books had been held for Mrs. Fawcett, and beside each reservation, in a second notation, a date, a set of initials, and a small number, 1 through 5. I examined several slips before I understood the system. The numbers recorded compliance. 1. A request made. 5. A request completed to satisfaction. Dorothea Fawcett had been running a ledger, not for money, for obligation. Every member who had something to conceal had something to provide. Grace Whitmore's initials appeared more than anyone else's. Her entries began 18 months ago and continued to 3 weeks before the murder, at which point they ceased. 3 weeks before the murder would be approximately when Alice Marsh wrote from Paris. I replaced the folder exactly as I had found it. Then I sat in the armchair nearest the door and waited for Grace to arrive. She knew I was there before she crossed the threshold. I could tell by the way she stopped. Just for a moment, one step inside the room, and then came on anyway. Violet Carew came to find me in the library at 10:30. She talked around it for a little while, which is understandable. There are no words in the ordinary vocabulary for what she was describing. She used instead the grammar of ellipsis, the thing almost said. A friendship, she called it. A particular friendship. A friendship that mattered very much to Grace and to Alice, and that Dorothea had known about from the beginning. She said, "Alice left in February, 18 months ago. Grace has not been the same since. She is very contained about it. She said, Dorothea wasn't cruel. She didn't think of it as cruel. That was the thing about Dorothea. She always had a reason." I said nothing. Violet was not asking for a response. She was setting down a weight she had been carrying since Tuesday morning, and she needed a moment without it. Then she straightened, picked up her bag, and left. Lady Farrell found me again at 3 o'clock, as I suspect she had intended to all along. She talked, at apparent leisure, about a Dickens novel. She noted, in the tone of a woman passing comment on the weather, that the returned items tray had not been cleared since Monday. Grace Whitmore, she observed, sees to it every morning at 9 without exception, has done for 11 years, and has not done so since Tuesday. She said, "A woman who stops doing the one thing she always does has either become very distracted or very frightened." In her experience, both conditions benefit from a little clarity. She met my eyes with perfect composure and said she hoped someone else would say it, because she was 71 and rather tired of being the only one in a room who could see clearly. Then she rose. She left. I went to look at the returned items tray. The returned items tray contained 2 novels, a volume of poetry, a biography of Lord Palmerston, and a folded reservation slip wrapped around something thin and approximately 4 inches long. The hatpin is silver, with a small amber bead at the crown. It has been wiped clean. The reservation slip wrapped around it is Grace Whitmore's own handwriting, not a library record, but a letter, written and never sent, not addressed to anyone, because it was never meant to be read. I read it. I shall not set down what it says. Some things are evidence and some things are true, and this is both. And both deserve some privacy. What I will say is that it is 18 months of a life written in 3 paragraphs. What was done, what it cost, what it means to have finally done something about it. I fold it back around the hatpin. I stand for a moment in the quiet library, then I go to find Grace. She is at the catalogue desk. The library is empty. It is 4 o'clock, and the light through the tall windows is the particular gold of late afternoon in autumn. I put the hatpin on the desk between us. She looks at it. I wait. The room is very quiet. She tells me, quietly, to the desk, without looking up, that Dorothea had been doing it for 3 years, that Alice couldn't bear it any longer, that she had kept thinking Dorothea would stop, or that someone else would stop her, or that she would find a way herself that didn't end here. I ask why to stay. She tells me that Alice had written. After 18 months of silence, Alice had written. And Dorothea had been in the reading room when the letter arrived. Grace had hidden it in a returned book, thought it was safe, and Dorothea had looked at her across the room and smiled. Just that. Just the smile. She says, I had the hatpin in my pocket. I'd been wearing it all week. I hadn't decided anything. And then I had. Silence. I do not tell her she ought to have come to me, or to Flynn, or to anyone else. She ought to have. The time for that is past. I tell her we are going to Miss Aldis's office now. She rises. She takes her coat from the chair behind the desk. She comes. I write the note in Miss Aldis's office while Grace sits in the straight-back chair by the window. Miss Aldis stands by the fireplace and says nothing. She is very good at that. Side gate. Now. She'll come quietly. The note goes out via Dottie. 11 minutes.
11 minutes from the note to the gate. I was not at the yard. I had been near at hand, on the pavement or close to it, for most of the last 3 days. I told her later I had been nearby. That was accurate, if not complete. Grace Whitmore came out through the servants' entrance, with Maud beside her. Contained, quiet. She came without any trouble at all. I looked at Maud, then at Grace. The question in my face was professional. The other thing in my face was also professional, or that is what we were both deciding. I looked back at Maud once, before we turned the corner. I said nothing. It was not necessary. I collected my coat from Dottie the following morning. She shook my hand with the formality of someone 17 years too young to be this composed, and was it anyway. I tipped her twice what was appropriate. She accepted without comment, which I respected. Miss Aldis was in the entrance hall to see me out. She told me the club was in my debt. I told her she would find the fee on her desk. She said she had meant something more than the fee. I accepted this. I put on my hat. I told her that Grace Whitmore was not a bad woman. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "No, that's rather the trouble." I went out through the front door. A bright morning, cold, the pavement wet from overnight rain. The street was empty. Of course it was. It was 8:30 and the case was closed, and Flynn had work to do, and there was no reason for anyone to be standing on the pavement. I stood there for a moment anyway, looking at the space where he had been. Then I walked. He was waiting at the end of the street. He was holding 2 cups of coffee from the cart on the corner, and he had the expression of a man who had been there for some time and was going to pretend he had only just arrived. He held out one of the cups. I thought you might be glad of coffee.
I thought you had work to do.
I have. I'm doing it.
He is doing nothing of the sort. He is standing at the end of a street in Mayfair at 8:30 in the morning, holding a cup of coffee he bought for me. I take the coffee. I tell him it is very good.
You were right, by the way, about the sherry. There was nothing in it.
I know. There was nothing in it.
You could have told me that 3 days ago.
I didn't know it 3 days ago. I know it now. He produces the particular silence of a man conceding a point he does not wish to be seen conceding. We walk. Neither of us decides to walk in the same direction. We simply do. The street is quiet. The coffee is good. He does not say, 4 days, was it worth it? And I do not say, yes, entirely. And between these two things not said, there is enough warmth to last me all the way back to the office. I think about Alice Marsh in Paris, and Grace Whitmore in custody, and Violet Carew, and Lady Farrell, and Dottie with her composed 19-year-old discretion, and Miss Aldous standing by the door saying, "That's rather the trouble." Grace Whitmore had steady hands, and 11 years of patience, and a hatpin she hadn't quite decided to use. Dorothea Fawcett had 30 years of membership, a favorite armchair, and a gift for knowing just enough about a person to make their life smaller. The files will record a murder. They won't record the 3 years before it, the books withheld, the letters delayed, the slow arithmetic of leverage applied by someone who never once thought of herself as cruel. That is, perhaps, the most dangerous kind of cruelty. Grace came quietly. She'd planned for 6 months, and hadn't planned for what came after, which tells you something about the nature of a decision made at the end of a very long rope. I find I am still thinking about the note she left in the returned items tray. I read it. I haven't written down what it said. Some evidence belongs to the person who made it. Flynn stood on that pavement for the better part of 3 days. Nobody asked him to. He could have sent a constable. He could have gone back to the yard and waited for my notes. He didn't. I noticed. I haven't said so, and I don't intend to. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But I noticed. There is a particular kind of person who stays. Not because they are required to. Not because they are watching for something. Simply because leaving would not have occurred to them. I am not accustomed to that kind of person. I am not entirely sure what to do with it. I think about the note under the door. Still here. 2 words, the capitals, not a syllable wasted. I have been resolute about not examining it. I remain so. I drink my coffee. Until the next inquiry, I remain. Maud West, private inquirer, amateur philosopher, and reluctant optimist.
You've been listening to the case files of Maud West. Tonight's episode, the Distaff Side. Join us next time when another truth waits patiently to be uncovered.